hoia oi ala mai te. Tuku ke unga he talaka kato e whanua mo i lotu. Kai tongia e whatongia lea taritari oi aho. Pe awha ki whenā pasi. Pea ke na panga maarie e ngahi tūkunga oi aho. Oku ia ia loto maafana mo loto oku honga maarie ke taritari lelei a tangata i whanua o Tonga. Ka koe taha e ngahi whetu uhopo he malai oi kumi mo langa whanua. I hene loto tō, kai lava ki kaunga kau mai mo ki tau tolu ki he polo kalama mo i mau ki whakamuna oi aho ni. Oku iaia a manaki lelei mo te tua o hange haa te tua me rie ki haa te taunga tau he futeri e ki ha whelafo aki mo ha talanoa lelei. Pea ke tuwhi ai ha ilo o ku toi māmangi mo tuwhi ai ai manu vai he whangota ai lulutai. I kai harea ia e mo ua ka koe koloa ai tonga koe whakamalo atu pē Tonga Ka'ili. I'd like to pay my respects to this sacred land that we are settlers on, and recognize that we have a responsibility to the indigenous people of the land that we're on. I'd like to whakatulo to our guests here, and mainly our guest of honor, Dr. Tēvita Ka'ili, for giving of his time and his energy to grace us with his wisdom today. I hope that we are all open to picking the fruit and the shells of the oceans that is offered up as sustenance to our own building of knowledge and wisdom that we will partake in today with Dr. Tēvita Ka'ili. I'd like to welcome our friends here from Tonga group, along with any guests that are new in this space. We like to be informal in our exchanges with each other, but also like to make sure that we observe our highest protocol of respect and love, especially when we have honored guests like we have here today with Dr. Ka'ili. So feel free to have your video on, and please be respectful to mute yourself when you know that there's too many disturbances around you. You don't have to keep your camera on. Please make yourself comfortable in this space. We welcome you in joining us. We are recording this session so that we can make this exchange and talanoa available beyond this space. And so just want you to be aware of that. There might also be pictures taken. So if you don't want your pictures to show up on Instagram or Facebook, you can turn your camera off. We meet weekly, and this is a shared space of learning. There is not a teacher. We all teach each other and we share with each other. If you want to join us, we meet every Thursday. You can find information on our Ofaki Tonga Instagram page. And you can bring materials. You don't need it, but we try to be prepared with materials in case that's what you're looking for in this space. We welcome friends and family members. Sometimes we have parents, which is a huge bonus when we have these exchanges. And once in a while, we invite some special guests to join us so that we can continue to learn together. And so today we are honored to have Dr. Tēvita Ka'ili join us. And I hope that we all get to share in the wisdom that he will provide for us. Lewa lewa e malanga, mo e whakahohaa kau tatau atu.
Mahalo, Pito Alisi. Ko le keo hufanga he whakatapu ko osi hona o whaki. Ko hoku hingoa ko hina mai atu whale. At this point, to open things up further, that was a beautiful whakatapu. Thank you, Alisi. We are going to have a special performance by our Saya. Now has prepared an introduction, and she's got it posted there in the chat for everyone to read. So Saya, you can go right ahead. And then directly after Saya's Fango Fango performance, Paulina has an introduction prepared for Dr. Ka'ili.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to introduce Dr. Ka'ili. Dr. Tēvita Ka'ili, Maui Tava He'ako, is a descendant of the Moana and can trace his roots back to Talanoa, Maui, and Hina. He is the author of Marking Indigeneity, the Tongan Art of Socio-Spatial Relations. He has achieved a bachelor's degree in accounting from Brigham Young University, Hawaii, a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Utah, a master's degree in social work from the University of Utah, a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Washington, as well as a PhD in anthropology from the University of Washington. He currently serves as both a dean and a professor at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. Dr. Ka'ili gives generously of his time and knowledge throughout all of Moana Nui, and it is with humble gratitude that we welcome him into our Ofaki Tonga Talanoa space. Thank you, Dr. Ka'ili.
All right, malo pito for everyone who participated in opening this space for us. Dr. Ka'ili, the time is yours now. If you would like to add more to your introduction or just introduce your topic, it's really up to you, but the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Ko kore ke whakamarumaru atu he talaka kato o e whanua. Pehe whoki ki he talafungani o e lotu. Pea whakaapapa ki he tangata I whanua o Waihi. Kai ata ke kau I he ofa ki Tonga mo tālanga o e ahoni. First, I want to acknowledge the history of Tonga as sacred history that has protected us as a people all the way up to this time. And I also want to acknowledge that I am on the land of the Kanaka Oiwi, Kanaka Maoli of Hawaii, where I am at in Laie, and I want to acknowledge that this is an important place to be acknowledged in my opening. This is an honor for me to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. Malo Pito Alisi for that beautiful poetic whakatapu, and also to Saya for that beautiful fangu rendition, and also Pauline for the introduction. I'm happy to be here, and I'm grateful, and hopefully that this will be a talanoa for us, so that you can feel that you know, if you have a question you want to ask. I have a short PowerPoint that I want to present just to sort of ground my work on Tongan cosmogony or Tonga Talatupua. And then I'd like you to, you know, ask questions. And feel free, if you want to ask questions during my presentation, you can send during, you know, in the chat. I'll be happy to, because I want to be able to, you know, be engaging in this particular forum. So here is my, the presentation I'm going to just sort of kind of give you is, are you all able to see my screen okay? Okay, very good. So the Talatupua Tongan cosmogony, this is our creation story. For me, this is an important aspect of us as we move through the process of decolonization. This is an act of decoloniality for me, because, you know, growing up, we learn all the creation stories of everyone, including the biblical Judeo-Christian creation story. But often if you ask one of us, you know, what's the creation story of Tonga? We may know pieces here and there. So for me, this is an act of sort of reviving this creation story, because it's important for us to know. And many of our traditions today that we're going to talk about, such as, you know, the Fahu system, the Tauhiva and Tauhivaha, all actually originated from our Talatupua from the very, very beginning. So this is why I want to sort of kind of start with this. Now, there have been many scholars that have worked on this issue. So I'm not the first. I'm sort of kind of, you know, the latest in a long line of scholars who've been working on Talatupua. This is Augustino Mahina, who Whangaheako Molotu Augustino Mahina, who wrote his doctoral dissertation on prehistory. This is back in 1992. And I think he's sort of kind of the first one to create a chart to map out our creation story. I'm sure there might be others, and but you know, as far as my research, he's sort of the first person. You can see he's trying to create and show the different lines. All of you who are in this, you know, Ofaki Tonga Zoom can trace your genealogy back to this. And we're going to talk about the different sets of twins. I'm just going to show you this so you can just like look at the names. You may see some names that are similar across the places, such as Talanoa and Maui, Hina, and so forth. But his dissertation is a good one. PhD thesis to sort of kind of go back and look and see the different, the way he puts it. So in 1998, Emil Wolfgram also created a cosmogony of Tonga. Some of you are familiar with Emil Wolfgram. He lives here in Hawaii, Waiahole, and he created this as sort of a way to help understand Tongans who are living outside of Tonga, to learn about, you know, their creation story. He has this sort of dividing into four realms of earth life, and Langi sky world, Lalofonua underworld, and then of course Moana or Fonua. He maps out how all our genealogy comes from this. So you can see that there are similarity here to Augustino Mahina's cosmogony, and so he is also trying to build on this from his view. Now, when I wrote my book in 2017, I decided that there are some things that needs to be added to the cosmogony. And so here's mine. It's not as elegant as Mahina and Wolfgram, but at least I tried to put the graphics together. And one of the things that I was trying to do is to sort of kind of take us way to the beginning, to sort of the very beginning of when our creation story, which started from the ocean, and started from there. Oftentimes, some of the creation story will start in Limu and Kele and Pulotu and so forth, but I wanted to go back to the beginning. And so we're gonna come back often in our Talanoa to this. So I'm just gonna go through this. So my genealogy is that I am, you know, direct descendants of many of these individuals. Limu and Kele, 41st great grandparents. Tangaloa is my 37th great grandfather. Hina is my 38th great grandmother. Maui Motua is my 37th great grandfather. So I try to keep them so that people know that these are real ancestors. These are people that are in my genealogical line, and I know that all of you have this genealogical line. So they're not just myths. They're not, you know, just a figure that people put out there, legend. They're actually real people, right? And we're descendants of them. So I always want to put that part out. So the beginning. From the very beginning, we begin from the ocean. Currents, waves, and wind, that's where our creation stories begin. We started migrating. That was the beginning. In the beginning, we were migrating. We were in the ocean, in the Wahanoa, in the open sea, or the sea between islands. And so ocean, currents, winds, waves, these are all our ancestors. They are our relatives. These are people that we have to take care of relations to. Yeah, and thinking of today as Earth Day, you know, this is such an important aspect of us to think about. We came from the ocean is our ancestor, and wind and waves, and all of these are our ancestors. We have to care for them. Tauhiwaha is an aspect of things that we need to do because these are our original ancestor. From there came Limu and Kele, seaweed and sea sediment. They are the original primordial ancestors of Tongans. So right from the ocean, you begin to see these two elements that came together. And out of these two elements, right, came sort of our whole entire genealogy. So there is an element of us of taking care, tauhiwaha, towards these two elements of Limu and Kele. This sort of kind of give us some interesting framework to think about, you know, as people are thinking about mining the seabeds in Tonga and the Pacific. It gives us a different viewpoints to say, hey, these are our ancestors. Can't be mining these seabeds because these seabeds are actually, we're ancestrally tied to them. So, you know, just to sort of kind of make us to think about this. Out of that came Pulotu. Pulotu is sort of the first land. So the Wahanoa is the first, Limu and Kele emerge out of there. Then Pulotu, which is our ancestral homeland. Many of you have heard of Pulotu. What I want to say about Pulotu, Pulotu is always to the Hihifo, the west side of Tonga. So most scholars think that this might be a reference to Fiji, possibly, or maybe any of the places west of Tonga. Pulotu, of course, is so important to us because, you know, today yam is so important to all of us Tongans, especially kaho kaho. But the beginning started here in our Tongan Talatupuat, and the reason why it's important because it came from Pulotu, where, you know, all chiefly things come from. Taro came from Pulotu, Kawa came from Pulotu. Yes, you may think, oh, but it came from Eweki. Isn't that the story about Whewanga and Whewhawa? No, I'm making an argument that Kawa came from Pulotu because in our original story, Tangaloa and Maui and them, they were drinking kava in Pulotu before they came over to Tonga. So the story that we have today is sort of kind of the second wave of kava coming to Tonga. But it first started in Pulotu. Even Heilala, the beautiful flower Heilala, that is a chiefly flower, is from Pulotu. So, you know, all the chiefly respect we have comes from this area. Of course, he gave birth to Havea Hikuleo, or Havea Hikuleo is sort of kind of the person that we're going to come back to. But she is the you know, the chiefess or chief of Pulotu. And I want to make this point. Havea Hikuleo is both female and male. She shows up in some account as female and some accounts as male. So very interesting to see sort of kind of two spirits here, or even some sort of gender fluidity that's happening in our origin story that we probably never talk about. But it's kind of very fascinating to sort of kind of go back and see that even the different accounts have Havea as both a female or male. So we'll come back and we'll talk about Havea Hikuleo, because this is important. Okay, Limankele gave birth to Toia Futuna, metallic rock. Out of that came 4 sets of twins. And things kind of come in twos for Tongans, hoa as pairs, important to our sort of Tongan cosmogony, but also our cosmology, because our worldview, things comes in pairs. And I would say that Tongan binary numbers started here. And, you know, I always like to say, you know, binaries, we started counting in binaries before computers use binaries. So, you know, if you're into computer coding, you may want to take a look at Tongan ethnomathematics because it's very interesting and quite scientific. So the way we count, whether we're counting coconuts or counting fish or counting yam, it's all actually based on 2. So 2 is actually the base, comes in, which we call in Tongan hoa. So when you get to 2, there's a different terms. You get to 20, there's a different term. So you can say kau, kauika. 200 is another term, 2000 is another term, and it goes forth from there. So we actually had a very sophisticated counting system that operates very similar to the binary that our computers are running off today. Yeah, our ancestors were sitting back home and counting fish and actually developed binary math before the Germans developed it in the 1600s. So we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about this later. Out of this, Piki and Kele is sort of the first fraternal twins. The first time we see the term whanua is here. A scholar such as Potawaine and Hufanga talks about the first whanua, of course, is the woman within the placenta. That's the first whanua. Then you're born into the second whanua, and then when you pass away, you go back to the whanua. So, of course, this is an area that's important for us because land, people, earth, culture, ecology are all encompassed in the whanua, which is represented by our tauvala, but also our kawa. And we'll probably might come back later and talk about this. So, Taufuli whanua and Havea Lola whanua, of course, yeah, they gave birth to Havea Hikuleo, paramount chief of Pulotu. Otua of fertility, highest ranking and the most powerful Otua. And I've always made the argument that this is where the origin of the Fahu system, which we still hold today, even though we live in different parts of the world, many of us still practice this, which is important to us, but it began here because you'll see that the respect from her brothers, Maui and Tangaloa, towards Hikuleo is what we continue to uphold today. In wherever we live. So now come back. So we sort of kind of first start the first part. So just to kind of see you, and I'm going pretty fast on this because I want to give you time to talk. So I'm just sort of kind of, you know, going fast on this. The second twins, Atungaki and Maimoa Longona, they gave birth to the Tangaloa clans, right? So they actually gave birth to Velelahi. And then Velalahi and Taufuli Fonua, they gave birth to Tangaloa Eki. And of course, all the Tangaloa comes through this line. Our current king today is king because he is descendants, the closest descendants to the Tangaloa. Of course, the first king of Tonga, Tuitonga, was direct descendant of Tangaloa. What you see here is the kiu. It's beautiful, you know, the kiu. And for you who live in Hawaii, you see them here all the time, the kolea birds. But that was one of the representation of one of the Tangaloa, which is Tangaloa Atulongolongo. We'll talk about a little bit later. Then the third twins, Fonuta and Fonutai, they gave birth to the Velesi, who gave birth to Maui Motua. All the Maui clans come here. Both Maui and Hina are one clan. So whenever you hear Hina or hear Maui, they're actually the same clan. They are both together. Oftentimes, we get a bit patriarchal and only focus on Maui, but it should be Maui and Hina, or Hina and Maui. Those two has to go together because they are a pair and they show up in our traditions, both as Maui and Hina. So that's an important pair to sort of kind of remember as we think about Maui and all its work. And of course, the last one, Hei Moana and Lupe, they're the 4 fraternal twins. Okay, you can see that we also have this sort of kind of relationship to the ocean, but also to turtles, and here to the sea snake and lupe pigeons that are important for us. One of our original deity, Nafanua and Topukulu, they actually migrated to Samoa. So we don't have a lot of story about them because they are more associated with Samoa, and Samoans have a lot of story with Nafanua. And so this particular story, we don't have a lot because they migrated to Samoa, but we can talk about it if you have questions about it. So again, here it is, you know, so many to talk about this cosmogony. Now, one way to think about it is to sort of kind of divide the world into the langi, the skyscape, the earthscape, and then the, you know, Lalofonua, underworld. And you can also think of seascape as a way that the Tongans have sort of kind of created this. In the origin story, in our Tangaloa would live up in the sky, Maui in the Lalofonua, and Hikuleo in the ancestral world, and they would hold this sort of kind of rope to guard her, but also to protect her because she has so much power that if she comes into Mama, she would destroy things, right? So again, kind of going back to the idea of Otua coming in too, and then we see that these are some of our principal Otua. Now, one thing I like to make about this, the Otua here are definitely gods, but they're deified ancestors. They are our ancestors who became deified. And why did they become deified? One is because of their great knowledge, and two, they are our top scientists at the time. They are very knowledgeable about the stars and the moon and the cycle of the crops. So I see them as you know, people who have achieved this level because of their knowledge. So, you know, just the way that people think of, you know, maybe Einstein as a god in some ways, many of us did see our ancestors in this way because of their great knowledge. Yeah. So Hikuleo, of course, we have many different, you know, just some of the things that we have over the years of images of Hikuleo. So I think one of the things that I want to say here is that the Tangaloa, which is with the descendants of the king, they were the high priests of Hikuleo. And so during the Inasi ceremony or the Polopolo ceremony in Tonga, where they did tribute to the king of Tonga, it was actually for Hikuleo. The tribute was to the high priest who was representing Hikuleo. And basically because she is the you know, goddess of fertility, that this was an important part of like making sure that your crop grows and so forth. Okay. Hikuleo, of course, her vessel is a sikota or Pacific kingfisher bird. So birds were often waka or vessels for many of our deities. In Hawaiians, they call them kinolau, but the Tongans call them waka. They were vessels. So that, you know, our ancestors came through these particular vessels. Yeah. Tangaloa, of course, something I want to say about this, you know, in other traditions like Lono and Rongo and Ro'o, in Tongan, we have the full name, Tangaloa Atulongolongo. So to me, Tangaloa Atulongolongo would be the ones that sort of kind of show up as Lono or Rongo on other tradition. And Tangaloa Langi is the ones that shows up as sort of kind of the thunder, lightning, storm, and possibly this is the one that shows up as Tane or Kane in other tradition. And Tangaloa Mana, which is one of our Tangaloa, was the one that was over the ocean. So oftentimes you hear in other tradition that Tangaloa was associated with the ocean. To us Tongan, this was Tangaloa Mana. So we had many different Tangaloa, right? And so very similar Samoans. Samoans also have different Tangaloas also, and they had different areas. So maybe somebody might have a question there about that later. So here's Tangaloa Atalongolongo, and his vessel was the Pacific Golden Plover, the Kiu, or also known as Tuli in Samoan. And this one's a very, very important part of like creating new. In the story of Tonga, when they first create an island, the Fue would be the first one that shows. Even recently when a new island show up in Tonga, the whole cycle of the island coming out and also seeing the Kiu showing up to the islands, very, very similar to the story here. So very, very scientific in a way, right? The first island, of course, is Ata or Ata. This is the first island that you can see is north of sort of Eua. Or north of Tonga. This is where our ancestors first begin. A very, very important one. The story of Tangaloa Atulongolongo is an important story, just to kind of think about the way that we came out from worms or uanga, as some others think about. But it's kind of very interesting that it ties us to the land and the ocean, or more specifically to the land. Tangaloa Atulongolongo's footprint is called Ve'etuli, which is a kupesi that we have. You can see it in these clubs, the Ve'etuli here. You can see it in this. Yeah. So we have showing that in many of the things that we have. The kupesi that we have is called the Fata'atui Tonga. It's actually a aerial view of the langi. This is from the work of Bruce Moa. So you can see the kupesi that way, but when you see this, whenever you see this kupesi, many of you have tapa that you see, that's just called Fata'atui Tonga, but it's actually a representation of the langi, right? Where the Tangaloas are from, but also in Tonga when many of our deities are buried, okay? So you can see them here, right? Many of you see this, and I know that some of you are from La Paha and Tatahamotonga, so many of you grew up seeing many of these particular beautiful langi that we have in these areas. Now, just one story to sort of tie this to Hawaii, for those of you who Hawaii, maybe some of you are not, but what we found some of the langi with Hawaiian style petroglyphs. You can see one here, you can see one over here. These are petroglyphs that are found only in Hawaii and in Tonga. So this is an interesting area to sort of explore, whether the Tongans brought the petroglyphs to Hawaii or the Hawaiians brought it to Tonga, but it's, you can see it in several of our things all over in Tonga and other areas. Okay, the Royal Taumafa Kava, of course, you have Tangaloa as the representative at the head. And, Tēvita Ka'ili's work is amazing in this area to show the movement of the sun in the equinox and also in the solstice. It's all connected to this particular one. The Maui Clan, so much to talk about the Maui Clan as far as, them fishing up islands, getting the fish hook from Manuka or Manua in the traditions. And of course, many of us know that the fish hook is actually a heriaki towards the Scorpius in the sky, which is a star constellation that was used for, navigation. So here, very, very scientific, right? But science and humanity sort of kind of go together, right? So you use poetry to talk about science, and science is always in a very poetic way. The Hamoa Maui is basically a reconstruction of the belt of Orion. Yeah, so the belt of Orion, so you can see this from the work of Tēvita Ka'ili, which is the sort of kind of the body of Orion, and this is where the Hamonga's design comes from. And inside the Hamonga, right, inside the Hamonga, the belt is also associated with Hina, and Hina is Alotolu. So this is some of the legacy from the Maui, the kumete a Maui, the kumete that we have today. Many of you are drinking kava. I see Saya, you have a kumete right there, maybe. But it is from Maui. Maui is the one who brought this kumete to us. There's an interesting story about a one of the Ha'amonga having a kumete up at the top, and there are others who been trying to find out this, because the kumete was used as a way to observe the sky in astronomy. So this is a really interesting area. The Ha'amonga is a diagonal 0-degree north megalithic structure that is used to measure the movement of the sun. Tupo the Fourth did this, and then Tēvita Ka'ili continued this important work. And now we continue in Tonga to sort of mark this. We have, you can go Google Earth, you can look down from Google Earth, and you can see how this is all marked up in Tonga. So that you can, find where the solstice, both this June and the December, and of course the equinox, and the way that they rise up here. And then Hina. Hina is associated with the moon. I would say this is our first moon scientist, is Hina. Our moon calendar and all our moon names are actually told as children of Hina and Sinilau. So we have 13 moons, and then also our moon cycle. We have 30 moon cycle, very similar to what Maoris and Hawaiians have, and has different dates, and days where you use the moon to go fishing and planting and so forth are all associated with Hina. Lots of stuff, yeah. And then, of course, you see this rock. Many of you have seen this in Tonga. This is where the rock that was used by Hina and Maui to snare the sun, using Hina's hair to slow down the sun, which is, to me, is just a scientific way of saying Maui was trying to understand the cycle of the sun, and probably one of our first scientists that learned the movement of the sun and so forth. But comes in Heliaki, beautiful Heliaki for all of us. Hawaiians and Tongans have a lot of similarities, right, in their genealogy. Here are some of the genealogy in the Kumulipo, and then on the other side is in Tonga. But you could do this, if you're in Aotearoa or in other places, you can do these things. So with that in mind, I would like to stop, and then instead of talking, see if you have questions and things that you would like to ask about any of the things I talked about, or even, the stuff that I've written about in the past. Happy to take any questions. And we can open it up for Talanoa.
Awesome. Malo Pito, Dr. Ka'ili, for that beautiful knowledge. I'm going to go ahead and facilitate the Q&A just to try to help things flow. I think the best way, we have plenty of time. We usually run this space until about 4:30 here, Hawaii time. So if you do have a question you'd like to ask, I think we do have time for people to ask their own questions. So go ahead and just type your name in the chat, and then I will call on people in that order. But while people are going ahead and doing that, I can start us off with a question. I liked that you had the comparisons of Tonga and Hawaii, because it's very relevant for me living here. And then also, last week in this space, we were talking a little bit about your book and how you had mentioned the tensions between the Kanaka and the Tongan people. And so we were hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit more about those tensions. I love that you always wrap them together, because it's not something that we commonly see done.
Yeah, I think the tension has to do with sort of lack of knowledge of our genealogy. Once you know your genealogy, and this is why, many of you, your parents will say you need to go and fe'iloaki with your relatives, right? So that you know who your relatives are, and that is a way of making sure that you know the people that you need to take care of your va with, yeah, especially if you know who it is. So sometimes, oftentimes in the diaspora, we just sort of kind of forget the deep genealogy that we may have with either Hawaiians here, or if you're in Aotearoa, of course, with the the Tangata Whenua or Mana Whenua, all of these groups in these places, we have strong genealogical ties. And I think the way to sort of work through this tension is to, first of all, say, hey, we're relatives, and we need to be allies and care about each other, especially, their struggles and their sovereignty movements and their movements to claim lands and so forth, yeah? Sometimes, Tongans would say, oh, we were never colonized. We are the ones in the Pacific and so forth. I think that's the wrong attitude, because, Tongans, even though we were not politically colonized, we were colonized in other areas, yeah. there are many elements of colonization, which most theorists refer to as coloniality, which is that the system and the patterns of colonization continues to operate, even though there are no settlers there, right? And so for me, that's the way to work and be able to work together with not just Hawaiians or Maoris or so forth, but any indigenous places you live. Yeah, if you're in Utah, you know, if you're zooming from Utah, you know, I would say pay attention to what the Koshu and the Shoshone and the Utes and so forth are doing there. Yeah, you know, if you're zooming from, you know, LA, pay attention to what the Tongva are doing, or, you know, San Francisco, Ohlone. You know, whatever place you're at, you need to know the indigenous people, because for us Tongan, that's what's important. You know, in our whakatapu, we always pay respect to the first people of a place. And so that's a very Tongan sort of orientation to think about the world in that way. I hope that answered your question, Hina.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. I have a few questions written down from what we've discussed in preparation for you to be here, so I'll just keep going through those. But for everyone that's here, it's totally an open Q&A, Talanoa style. So please, don't be shy, ask your questions. The next question I wanted to
and feel free to critique my work too. I'm happy if you have your critical, you know, thinking and say, hey, Tēvita, you never talk about this issue. So I'm happy to be critique. I'm not above critique.
I love that accountability and the openness. I guess this kind of goes with the last question. What is your perspective on navigating the evolution of culture? You know, you talk a lot about decolonizing and just recognizing that what is the balance? How do we find the balance between our traditions and trying to exist in this modern world?
Yeah. You know, many of you know I'm a Tava theorist, right? So I come from the tradition of Okusi, where one of the ideas is that we mediate and reconciles the conflict and find a sort of a balance between, in a way that you can say, hey, we can still coexist. We're not saying that modernity or Western culture is something that we have to all throw away, but we can find a sort of good medium between the two. My favorite one is to just look at our traditional attire, the tavala with a tupenu and a shirt that's Western and a hekesi that comes from another culture. We actually kind of weave all of them together, right? We still have the kafa and the tavala, and then other elements of it are sort of foreign. And what we've done is we sort of kind of indigenize them, right? And say, hey, these can be part of us. We can make that belong to who we are as Tongan and make it part of who we are. So the way I see it is like, you know, of course, you're living outside of Tonga. You take the best of Tongan, you take, you know, the new culture, and you weave them together like a mat and create a new mat. That's the way I see it. And it's I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not like some people say, no, I'm total traditionalist. I don't want to change. Everything has to be the exact same. To me, I think we can change. We can pull from our old oral traditions and so forth to, you know, empower and create new identities for us in the diaspora outside of Tonga, and still be Tongan at the same time, right? Just different versions of Tongans. Yeah, you got a version of Tongans in Tonga, and then, you know, Hawaii and Aotearoa in Australia and so forth. But they're still all Tongan. They're all part of the whanua of the land and the nation of Tonga.
That was so beautifully said. Thank you for that. We do have a lineup now. People are in the chat. So our order right now is Pauline, George, and Matt. So I'll go ahead and just let those three people, Pauline go first, right after that, George be ready, and then Matt after that.
Hi, Dr. Ka'ili. Thank you so much for sharing space. I am curious about genealogy and the way that you presented it. I'm wanting to know at what point, if you have any knowledge of when did the practice of not marrying your cousin or your family come into play? And because when we think about genealogy as like our generation, millennials, or and maybe like older generation, it's you need to go there so you don't marry your cousin, or you need to know like your relationship. And by all means, we should know our relationships, but I'm looking at your presentation and having I feel like such a different type of connection to genealogy. And so I feel like this is such a really basic understanding of genealogy, the way I see it, as you need to know your relatives. But I'm wanting to know, at what point did it come to, in like Tongan history, if you know, did the practicing of not marrying your brother or not marrying your relative become a thing?
Excellent question. I'd say at the beginning of the founding of people from the Moana Nui, the Polynesian, it was always a small group, and you can see from our genealogy that the twins were marrying each other and so forth. And so I would say that in the beginning that was sort of the case. But even after that, we still see this practice in our chiefly class. Our chiefly class still marry cousins, first cousin, second cousin, usually second cousins or so forth, right? In Tongan, we call it kitetama. In Hawaiian, they call it ni'aupio, which is sort of kind of cousin marriage, right? But of course, over time, people decided that, this was not the way, perhaps you should find people outside, and it was good for alliances and so forth. But I would say that the practice is still practiced today, mainly by the chiefly class. So it has not gone away. Yeah. So you can, if you look at our royal family and so forth, you can just look at their genealogy, and they're like second, third cousins and so forth. That's something that is still practiced up to today. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question. I think the commoners try not to practice that. They marry maybe distant relatives. Part of the reason why the chiefly class married their cousins and so forth was to keep the blood within the family, the chiefly blood and so forth. That was the reason, and so forth. Hopefully that answered your question, Pauline. I say just listen to your parents. They say you need to go out and look at other people in the family. That's good. Yes, it's good allies also, right? All right. Hopefully that answers your question. Yes, decolonizing your lines. Okay, Mr. Saya, were you next?
Sorry, I think it was George next with a question.
Oh, George. Okay.
Oh, hi, and Professor Ka'ili.
Yes.
Great. Hi. I've sat at your feet, and I've been a part of a lot of your sessions. So I'm very thankful for your time here. I really appreciated your thoughts about how we were scientists and how and thank you for humanizing Maui and Tangaloa, because I live in Denver, and every time people think about Polynesia, they think about Maui and Moana, and just for you to put into a language and a realness that they're actual real individuals who are my ancestors. My question is, can you please expound more about Hafahu system, because and her reverence that Tangaloa and Maui had for Hina Momoi, 12-syllable female Polynesian name, because in my family, and that's always felt like an obligation, and where an oppressive obligation, and where just through time, and I would always ask, why are we doing this? And then I would always hear, and I was like, okay, 20s grown man is still being told to shut up. But if you could please expound more about the roots of that relationship,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you. Great question, George. First, I want to say that many of our traditional stories are in Heliaki form. Heliaki is using symbols and poetry to talk about science. Yeah. So instead of discovering an island, you say you fish up the island, which is much more poetic and beautiful, and you remember the story better than saying, you use the stars to go out and find islands. So Heliaki is sort of the way that our ancestors used to talk about science and so forth. Now, coming to your question about hikuleo, we know from our traditional knowledge that the women were associated with fertility. So in a sense, we, in the early Tonga, there was an idea that women had to be, you basically respect and worship them because they had controls on the production of lands. So your taro would grow, or your yam, and so forth, because these were the realms of women. Women's were the one who actually had power over that. So the respect was part of saying, hey, I have to respect women, especially sisters, because they are the ones that have power over this area. And if you want to have a productive land, or if you want to have, crops and so forth, this was Hikuleo's realm. And I would say, because probably at the beginning, Hikuleo was the scientist that had the most knowledge about land and production of land, and therefore the respect started there. And then from then on, throughout the generation, women continue to be the one that hold the knowledge that are related to that. Because you can see that with Hina being the one that's, knows the moon phases. Remember, we, as planters, as cultivators, everything was important to us as far as growing. And so women in those particular realms had a lot of knowledge, and therefore that's where the respect came to them. And so today we still continue those forms of respect. And it may feel oppressive only because people don't understand where the origin and how this all came about. In that sense, yeah. There's a Tongan belief that if you don't respect your sister, she can curse you and you don't have children. Yeah,
I've heard that.
Yes. So this is also tied to hikuleo, because your sister is actually the hikuleo of your family, right? Or your mehikitanga is actually the hikuleo of your family. And in funerals and birthdays, you can see them performing that particular role, which is both spiritual. It's a spirituality, but also highly scientific in that sense.
Thank you very much.
My turn.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Professor Ka'ili, kia ora. My name is Matt. I live in New Zealand.
Kia ora.
Currently from Tongan descent of Vava'u, Halafuli. And so cosmogony, I think, is paramount for my peoples here in New Zealand. We teach our origin stories as often as we can, and not knowing my Tongan side as well as I should, it's amazing to hear that moana or the oceans were the primary source, whereas Maori would take it right back to the nothing, the void. And so understanding how that Tongan concept of origins actually stems from something as opposed to beginning from nothing was amazing to me. So thank you for sharing that. My question actually goes with that. In our stories here in Aotearoa, holding true to Maui, but also Hina, more so being the relevance of stars and moon, and being astrology is one of the things that we're trying to humanize or trying to gain real concepts. But the concept of Maui and how his origin through genealogy has been proven, but also to show that his works are relevant even throughout Polynesia. In your studies, have you been able to find real fragments of the man himself and where he actually touched place?
Yes, we have you know, not only the stories from Tonga, but from Hawaii and Aotearoa and other places where they have, you know, places that have different sort of commemorations to Maui. In fact, in Vava'u, where you're from, in the island of Koloa, they had a temple built just to for Maui, both Maui Atalanga and Maui Kisikisi, or Maui Tikitiki in Maori language, lived, and so we actually have sort of like places and homes and megalithics that are still around today. These were the works of the Maui, and because we have several Maui, not just one. Maui, like Tangaloa or Hikuleo, they were chiefly titles. They were titles that certain people who held that particular knowledge was passed down to them in that way. Yeah. Including surfing. Surfing for us, that was Maui's thing. Maui was our surfer. Yeah, he loved to surf. Good question. Yes. Thank you.
I think I'm next, but stop me if I wasn't next. Maulele, Dr. Ka'ili, mahalo for coming. Whanga, whakatapu, that was said earlier. I'm sorry, I'm working on my Tongan. I had a question. I had a couple questions actually. The first was, you mentioned gender fluidity around the story of Hikuleo, or forgive me if it was another deity, but this is actually the first time I'm hearing of the possibility that she or they were two-spirit or gender fluid. And I guess I'm wondering if you know other ways that gender fluidity has shown up in our Tongan culture. Because I know we have like the term Whakalei, but I always thought it was an English transliteration. And I'm wondering if you know of more terms or customs that predate Western contact that could support the existence of gender fluidity within our culture. And then the second question is kind of related, because you mentioned like the influence of patriarchy on our Tongan people and even within learning our Tongan history. And I'm wondering, especially in your position of higher academia and being in an academic institution that is also like tied to the Mormon Church, I guess I'm wondering, what kinds of ways do you see that patriarchy still continuing to exist in the spaces you enter, and maybe like what challenges are you trying to address around that?
All right, thank you. Awesome question. Let me start with the gender fluidity. Hikuleo is actually not the only one that shows up in our tradition that is both male and female. We have others. Fehuluni is another one. So some of you may know Fehuluni. First began as a male, but then later became a female, and sort of kind of go back and forth between male and female. So some of you may, want to research the story of Fehuluni, because that's a great story. Also a deity from Vava'u for you, Kazi. You may want to look at that. Tafakula was another deity. This is a deity from Ewa. So Tafakula was both male and female. Went back and forth, sort of an interesting. We don't have a term for them. They just showed up as so the term whakawhewhine or whakaleiti, these are sort of kind of later terms that I would say. So I'm not sure if there was a term before them. And then there's Mali Mehevao, which is a deity of Woleva in Hapai. This particular deity was also male and female, and would incarnate or come in the form of an owl. In fact, this deity would come and speak outside of your house if somebody was pregnant. So this was a sign that somebody has become, is pregnant in the house. But and so I'm aware of at least four Tongan deity that were both male and females from my research. But I'm pretty sure that there are more than that. Yeah. Now, I know that this sometimes is uncomfortable for people who may be Christian, or if, because of Christianity and so forth has come. But, I'm just telling the story as it is. This is the way that the story was passed down to us. Yeah. On one time they were male. You can see them in some stories, they were female. And that's, that's just the way the story is. And I think that's a sort of kind of way to see the way our ancestors thought about gender in many ways. Yeah. As far as patriarchy, I would say Tonga was both a patriarchy and a matriarchy, because we had both the Mehikitanga, which is matriarchy, and the Urumotua, which was patriarchy. And the two as a hoa, remember I said all things comes as hoa in Tonga, they come as pair. They were actually equally valued, and they would be sort of kind of the leaders of the family. If you ever been to a Tongan funerals, the Urumotua actually can't really make major decision unless he consult with the Mehikitanga and so forth. So the two are sort of the two leaders. They're the senior male and the senior female of the family. I would say that during the process of colonization and Christianization, Tonga became much more patriarchy in some sense. We still have the fahu and the Mehikitanga, and where you have females role, but in some sense, we sort of move towards more of a European patriarchal system. And so one of the things that we like, most people are trying to do now, is to bring sort of that balance back, the balance of both the matriarchy and patriarchy in Tonga. So that, I think as leaders, they function much better in having those as a hoa, as a partner. Yeah. And so, there's a lot of work, not only within, all the Christian religions, right? Whether it's Mormon Church or Wesleyan or others, that have to sort of kind of move towards this area of, valuing women and so forth, which was already there in our traditions. Yeah. Hopefully that answered your question, Mane.
Sorry, I'm going to interject just really quickly to share what the next lineup is. Thank you for that question, Maka, and thank you for that beautiful answer. I think that gave us a lot of insight. We've been discussing these kinds of topics in our space. But next up, we have Takipo, followed directly by Saya. And then I just wanted to check, Kalake, did you have a question as well? No, okay, I was just making sure. All right, so right now that's our lineup. So Takipo is next, directly followed by Saya.
Hi, Dr. Ka'ili. I'm zooming to you from New York City. And what I loved about your presentation is it's nice to hear all of this information told to me from someone who is like of the culture, like no disrespect to anybody else doing it, but it's really, really cool. And my question's pretty basic. I just wanted to know, for someone who wanted to research more about the astrology and a lot of these, just this, almost everything, are there any authors or are there books out there that you recommend that we could use to start our own research, or something that I could like add to my library? Yeah, I'd really love to hear who you're reading. And then I guess off of that, or going back to, I think it was Maka who asked the other question before about the gender fluidity. It's interesting. I had never heard about these deities who were gender fluid, and then to be learning about them now. But I've always thought our culture's like pretty conservative. And so to like hear that there were deities that were kind of like respected or looked to who were gender fluid, and then to know that, like, I don't know, at least in my case, like I've never heard of them before, and it just kind of seemed like they were erased. I guess, when did that happen? Or were those deities really received well? I mean, did people really like appreciate their thoughts? Or I mean, I don't know. Anyways, that's my question. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Takipo, for your question. Great questions. First of all, you're interested in like astronomy or indigenous astronomy. I like to call them indigenous astronomy because that's what we are today. Tēvita Ka'ili, he is probably the foremost Tongan indigenous astronomers. If you read any of his work, Hina is, I think Hina, it's your uncle, right? He has done a lot of work. He has a book called Tongan Astronomy, so you might want to just sort of read his book. And then he has a lot of other just lectures that he has given over the years. So just look up Tēvita Ka'ili. He actually has a blog, I think, online that he puts out all of this information. So he's as far as that as astronomy is concerned. There are others who have written about it. They're not Tongans, but I would say start with Tēvita Ka'ili because he's good as far as that. If you want to just read about just Tongan culture and like ideas about that, Futahelu, the late Futahelu who's passed away, he's one to read. Okustino Mahina is another person to read. Konai Helu, Famine out of University of South Pacific. She's really, she has a lot of writing about decolonizing education. Melenaite Taumoi Folau, she's a Tongan linguist at University of Auckland. So she's another person that you want to add to your list. Who else? Ana Taufe Ulungaki. Ana Taufe Ulungaki is another Tongan linguist, studied in Britain and been writing about language and so forth. So there are actually many, both males and female. So you want to make sure that you want to read all of these specific ones. Now your other questions about this aspect as far as gender and why did we not have these stories and so forth. I think during the Christianization of Tonga, which is also a colonial process, right? Some of these stories were not recorded or that they were marginalized and so forth. That's why we don't really have a lot of these specific stories. You can still find them, but you have to like dig deep into some of the manuscripts of stories that are associated with this. Yeah, but Hikuleo is our highest deity, I would say, in Tonga. And she is the one that is sort of showed up as both male and female. Yeah. Did that answer all your question, or did you have another one on that?
I have many, but those two work
Okay.
right now. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Good.
Ko re wege uhu whanga I he whakatapuko osi hono au whaki. Ka whaki whakahohaa. I apologize, everyone. I'm going to swing the Talanoa in an Aotearoa facing orientation where I'm at. I wanted to tease out one of the ideas, Tēvita, in your slide when you were talking about Tangaloa Atu Longolongo. You had the name Rongo with a question mark next to it. And it's interesting to me because Rongo, of course, is a otua or god in the Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world, who's connected to peace and also food cultivation. I was wondering if you could maybe share a little bit more about Tangaloa Atu Longolongo, if you know any of his characteristics, if see if we can tease out some of these ideas if there is a connection there.
Yeah, good. When we first saw plants in Tonga, it's Tangaloa Atu Longolongo with the fue. Yeah, so if you remember the fue, Tangaloa came from the sky by Tangaloa Eiki, who sent him down to look for land. Yeah, and so he came down and he was looking for land, and then so he said, there's not really no land, basically just looks like some sort of reef, maybe, not sure. So Tangaloa Eiki gave him the fue to sort of plant there, so brought the fue and planted there. So the fue as a plant, as a cultivating sort of plant, to me is an indication that this is an earlier version of longo, right, or lono, or rongo in Aotearoa, where this particular deity is associated with cultivation, especially fue and of course sweet potato or kumara is also sort of associated with longo in that particular sense. And I would say that perhaps what happened is that the story kind of started out in Tonga, and then it sort of developed more in Eastern Polynesia, where this particular Tangaloa became associated with all of that. There's also the migration part and the idea that this Tangaloa came in the form of kiu. And here in Hawaii, actually, the kolea is a body form of lono. So it's even much more connected in the way that you see the two connected together. Yeah, so hopefully, Saya, that helped you in making that connection with Tangaloa, Atulongolongo, and Rongo.
All right, I think that's all of the lineup, unless, feel free, we still have time, as long as Dr. Ka'ili still has time for a few more questions. One that we've really been discussing in our Ofakitonga space is we were hoping to get your insight on the Tongan greeting, Siota Ofa. We had been using it pretty frequently in our space, but we've heard kind of debates in the community about Siota Ofa, whether it is appropriate to use. I think some people say it's a little too intimate. And so we were hoping to get your insight around that greeting.
Oh, yeah, good. Yes, I think if you look at all the old literature in Tonga, that's the greeting that they use. In fact, in the story of Aho Eitu, remember Aho Eitu is the son of Tangaloa Eitu Matupua, who came down and was born on Earth, but went back to go look for his father in Langi. When he actually first went up to look for when he saw his father, Tangaloa Eitu Matupua, he said Siota Ofa, and they said Siota Ofa to each other. So this is actually the first traditions that I saw the Siota Ofa use. So it comes from our early tradition of the way that it was used. And I guess, yeah, perhaps you could say, yeah, this is a father and son saying Siota Ofa to each other. So it's more of an intimate way of saying it. But, there are other traditions where I've seen people use it that are not relatives, but because Tongans feel like we're all related, we're all one big family, so why can't we just say Siota Ofa to everyone, right? That is Tongan, because we're all cousins, we're all descendants of, Hikuleo and Tangaloa and Maui and Hina, and so I guess it's up to people to say. Now, I could see the challenges is because we haven't used it for many years and we're just sort of resurrecting it. And so it may sound a bit awkward to people to use the word Siota Ofa, but using Ofa and Alofa and Aloha is a very Moana Nui Polynesian things that people use in their greeting, right? So adding Ofa into the way that we say hello to each other, you can see that this is attest to and evidence from all our cousins are also using it. So my take on it is, yes, go for it. Use Siota Ofa to all your friends and friends who are far away and so forth. Yeah, hopefully that was answer some of your questions.
There are a few questions that people have typed in the chat that I'll go ahead and read.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
I haven't been paying attention to our chat here.
Yeah, it's moving pretty quickly. Matt was asking if Siota Ofa is a form of a blessing, like Kia ora in New Zealand, in Maori.
Form of a blessing. I think it's more of an emotional way of saying, love to somebody. And it can be a blessing in that particular form, right? Because, at the heart of what we do as Tongans and people of the Moana Nui, Ofa was at the heart of that, right? That's how we survive, sharing, Tauhi Waha, all of that are all based on Ofa, love for each other. Yeah. Kustina Mahina has a really good writing about Ofa where he talks about that this actually started when we were voyaging. And while we were voyaging, we had to share our resources. That was the only way we could survive, right? Because as voyagers, to make those long voyages from one place, you had to be able to, sharing was a essential part of what it means to survive. Because if you didn't share, of course, people would die and we would not work together with each other. So for him, Ofa actually emerged out of that context of long deep sea voyaging.
Thank you for that. Mina has a question in the chat. Mina, did you want to ask your question? Okay, I can read it. That's fine. Let's see. So she typed it out here. It says, is there a movement to try to reintroduce the deities and our creation story and our beginnings, our history in a broader sense in Tonga and in our communities? I've heard all these stories from my mom and grandma, but a lot of people don't have the same setup in each of their families. Thank you.
Good questions. I'm not aware of a movement in Tonga. I think the movement's more out in the diaspora. Most of us who have left Tonga have come to really value our ancestors and see them as important for us. You know, during the process of Christianization of Tonga, many of the deities were destroyed. You know, the photos that I showed you of Hikuleo, these are all pictures of Hikuleo. None of them are in Tonga. They're all in museums scattered across the world. In Europe, there's one here in Bishop Museum. There's another one in, Auckland Museum. So because during that process, it was a pretty violent process, right? The process of Christianization of Tonga. So many of our deities were destroyed, and in that process, Tonga just became Christian and did not want to sort of kind of look at any of these and saw it as more of an evil. They call it Devolo and so forth. Now, the new generations, like your generation and others, are saying, hey, these are our ancestors. We should bring them back. They are part of us. People who are doing family history are saying, hey, if I do my family history, I get to Talanoa. So what do I do when I get there to this particular, deity? So the way I see it is that, we should cherish them and so forth. So it's a small movement. It's not something that's big. I would say the Maoris and Hawaiians and Tahitians and they are much more involved in sort of trying to bring this knowledge back. Tongans, we're still trying to figure out how to navigate between Christianity and indigeneity. What's the best way to keep a balance between the two? And I think we can do it. We've done it with Christianity. I think we can still do it with this and not feel like that we have to embrace one and give up on other parts. When Christianity came to Tonga, there were elements of Christianity that we kept, right? So we kept the kava ceremony, which is part of the old religion, right? And we've kept the way that we respect the whaifekau, like we respect the chief. So all of those things we did respect, but we kind of left some of our deity out. And now I'm saying we can bring them back and create some sort of syncretism and could work out. Yeah.
All right. So wrapping everything up, we have 3 more questions lined up.
Oh, yeah,
Dr.
sure.
Ka'ili, is that all right? Awesome. So our lineup to close things out, we have Danny and then Pauline and Layla. Go ahead, Danny.
Thank you, Hina. Thank you, Dr. Ka'ili. This conversation has turned back to genealogy, and that's what I wanted to ask about. Your presentation is the first time that I've really felt that these figures weren't just mythological, kind of figments of imagination. And I felt that connection, and I really appreciate that. And to see the slide with how you're related to them as your 37th great grandfather or 41st, that's exactly what I aspire to do. And I'm wondering how you got there, especially being in the diaspora. It's like looking online and, hoping someone else kind of got there before me. So I'm wondering if you have any advice, or like, can I copy you to a certain extent? If you have advice for those of us who are trying to do our genealogies. Thank you.
Great question. I'm happy to share my PowerPoint, but also just to if you ask most Tongans that do their genealogy, it's very easy to get to Talanoa. only because our king system, our tuitongas, kept that genealogy well. So if you can get your genealogy to any of the kingly line, you can get to Tangaloa pretty easily. Yeah. So and partly because that was the way that you know, you receive power and so forth. I'm happy to share what I have and you know, to share my genealogy, because if I share it, you could probably see the way that your line connect to many of these. Yeah. And I would say all Tongans at some points have some sort of connection to the Tonga line, or even the Tuiha Takalawa or Tuikanokupolu. And once you get to those lines, it's very easy to get to Tangaloa. Now, once you get to Tangaloa, all you have to say is that Tangaloa is, you know, Maui is just a brother, and then Hikuleo is a sister. So the genealogy just goes from there. And then what I did is I just sort of kind of figured out, you know, how many generations back this go. I uploaded my genealogy up to ancestry.com, and it's pretty easy. You just ask ancestry.com to tell you, you know, how far away is Tangaloa from me, and they say, oh yeah, he's your 42nd great grandfather, or Hina, and so forth. So you can even use, you know, some of the genealogy software out there to do that. But it's when you do that, it actually becomes more real to you, right? That it's no longer just a Disney show or, you know, a story that you read. You're like, oh yeah, I'm a direct descendant of these ancestors. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. That's really generous. Thank you.
And I'll leave my email. Hina, you have my emails. You can share it with everybody. You know, I'm pretty active on Facebook, you know, so you can even message me on Facebook and stuff. I know Facebook's for the old people, but hey, it's the only social media I know how to use. I don't know how to use all the other fancy ones, like, and so forth. So yeah.
Okay, I think I'm next. Just stop me if I'm not. I'm wanting to know how your research is perceived amongst Tongans in Tonga. Like, do the kids in Tonga learn this stuff there? And do they know how to trace like these lines of lineage better than us in the diaspora who don't know a lot of things? I'll just speak for myself. I don't know much of this information because I guess that's a little bit of dissonance, feeling like not only am I behind in language, I'm behind in cultural understanding, cultural history, and the information that is made available to, I want to say for me, which is on Google, is extremely hard to come across like this information. And do you feel like, what can we do better to make this more available so that, you know, there's a better sense of connection to our origin stories?
Yeah, good question. As far as my research, I think the Tongans in the diaspora are much more receptive to my research than Tongans in Tonga. There is sometimes a sense that I'm researching things that, you know, that is, people feel like these are old stories that we don't really think it's worthwhile. So especially, you know, the old gods of Tonga, it sometimes is difficult for people who are Christian to sort of accept the deities. But some are coming around to it, and I think over years it will be. But the ones who are outside of Tonga, they love this stuff and they think that this is great, and they want to continue to embrace that and so forth. Some of us have been working to try to get some sort of a site where we can put all of this information. We've been, myself and 3 of my colleagues, they're outside of Tonga, Melanaite Tamoe Folau in New Zealand, Tēvita Ka'ili in New Zealand, and Wani Havea in Australia, have been asking the Tongan government if we could at least begin by putting our Tongan dictionary online, so that we can have a Tongan dictionary that you can just go and search, like the Maori dictionary or the Hawaiian dictionary, right? And then the idea is that from there, we'd like to put all the other cultural information online, also in some sort of central site where people can go research and so forth. So we're sort of working to try to get permission from the Tongan government to put some of these information up. So hopefully that will happen within the next next year or so, and that will make it easier to do your research on that, Pauline. Yeah, we're starting with a dictionary. It's a good start. At least a dictionary out there. Yeah, Tongan dictionary.
Okay, hi. I think I'm next.
Yes, go ahead, Leila.
Mahalo for being here, Dr. Ka'ili. This is honestly, I'm a little nervous because like I read your work and it's like amazing, and then I found out that you're gonna be like a speaker on here, so I'm like a little starstruck. But so I'm writing a paper that's like very inspired by your work with Tauhiva and Apeli Ha'ofa's Our Sea of Islands, and I want to do more research on our people, like our trade routes and such in pre-colonial Oceania, and how we had these like massive flourishing economies like throughout Oceania. And I was just wondering if you have any recommendations for books or authors, or like where I could learn more about that. That's not from a missionary Palangi perspective. So yeah.
Yes. I would say it's a great topic to do research, and most of that are in our oral traditions. So I would say look into many of our stories, because a lot of our stories talk about our movement towards with Samoa and Fiji, Uvea, Futuna. Even Tahiti and Hawaii, we have stories of migration back and forth and trade routes with many of these specific groups. And this is an area no one has done a lot of research in it, so you'll be the first one to sort of kind of talk about it. But I would say look into many of our traditional stories around these particular areas. Now, the missionaries wrote a lot of these stories, so you can still read what the missionaries wrote as far as the story, and then from there you can take the information out of that to make your own conclusion about the way that we, just our trading route that was happening at that time. Even some of our, let's just take some of our dances. Take, for example, the Metupaki. The Metupaki is, one of our ancient dance, and it's actually a sea route from Tonga to the Kiribati. And you can see that in the song, it names all the different stops on your way from Tonga to the Kiribati and back. I would say Futahelu would be the person to read on this. Yeah, Futahelu, Tongan scholar. He's really good at some of these specific areas. He's written a lot about that. And he actually has a interpretation of the Metupaki dance. So stories, our dances, music in the dances, all of these days. That's where our history was put in. Yeah. Queen Salote also has a lot of songs. There's a book called The Songs of Queen Salote, which is both in Tongan and English, Melanaite Taumai Falau, translated into English. So you can see that she writes about some of these migration back and forth, and she talks about some of our early canoes like the Hifofua and so forth in these ta'anga. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're just coming up on the end of our time. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Ka'ili, for sharing this space with us and just so freely giving of your time and your knowledge. We usually take a group photo. Lilika, did we want to do our group photo before everyone signs off? And then I'll close out. Is Lilika here?
I think she's has she gone?
Yeah, so we usually take a photo that may or may not end up on the Instagram. If you don't already follow Ofaki Tonga, it's been so great seeing so many new faces. We are here every week, not necessarily with a guest speaker, but feel free to, it's an open space for anyone to join. But if you don't want to be in the photo, you can turn your camera off, totally fine. But I think Lilika is going to take our group photo, so everyone get camera ready. Okay, thank you. So this whole Zoom, this Talanoa session was recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube. A good place for updates is the Instagram page. We also have a Twitter, all under Tonga Talanoa. We have an Instagram chat as well as a Discord. We're in pretty constant communication with each other, constantly having these kinds of Talanoa. So this is just like a little snippet of it, right? But I will be sharing, Tēvita said, go ahead and share his email address in case you weren't able to ask your question in this space, and then you can ask it there. Does anyone have any closing remarks that they want to add before we close out? Oh, Alisi, go right ahead.
Sorry. I just want to say thank you also, Tēvita Ka'ili, but I want to acknowledge our elders that are here with us. Kalake, Viliami, Malo Popo. It's so always good to see our elders join us. And, please join us anytime you are available. But I just wanted to acknowledge our elders that are here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for making that point, Alisi. Yes, it is a completely open space, and we are always really grateful to have anyone, especially elders, because you've got knowledge that we don't have, so that we can share. And I love what Tēvita said about, how we evolve as a culture is by taking parts and weaving and making a new mat together. And so that's what we do here every week. Feel free to join us. Yeah, I think that's everything. Am I missing anything? Well, malo apito, Dr. Ka'ili, for being here with us, and for everyone for creating this space together.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for creating this safe space for us to Talanoa. And good to see that, all of you of Tongan descent are doing great work out there. So thank you and malo apito. Ofalahi atu.